Hello to everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. Before we start, I will just show you the agenda of this webinar. We will start with a brief description of the situation of the 5G context, a slide related to the different activities that have been performed on this topic, the Airbus contribution, and then we will go into the details of the effects of the 5G perturbation on the radio altimeter system. A few words about the FAA airworthiness directive that has been published last week, and about the consequence on your AFM. And then we will go to operational recommendation, the way forward, and the conclusion. Jan will present the operational recommendation and the conclusion. So, as you know, worldwide telecommunication has allocated 5G frequencies on mid-band spectrum, also known as C-band, close to the radio altimeter operating range, which is 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz. Based on the Radio Technical Commission for Aeronautic, RTCA, 5G mid-band emission have been assessed as able to interfere with the radio altimeters. On the slide here, you have the description of the different mid-band spectrum used across the world. And we are here today to talk mainly about the consequences of the introduction of the USA 5G frequency. Just for your information, we have already deployed 5G antennas across the world with different band spectrum. And for those in green, we have already in place some mitigations that allow the aircraft to operate without any concern. Okay, so on this slide, you can see different examples of activities that have been launched, and some of them are still ongoing. I will not go through all of them, but just for your records, at the beginning, some of the activities were related to the update of the performance standard of the radio altimeters. And this has been performed by the RTCA and Euro-K. The FAA has been working on the effect of the 5G and is currently still engaging some discussion with the FCC, NTIA, and the US Congress. The EASA is also working on the vulnerability of the radio altimeters to the 5G signals. More recently, you have been informed about the FAA Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin that has been published in November of this year. And we have still ongoing activities today with the International Coordinating Council of Aerospace and IATA, EIQ, etc. Among those activities, Airbus have been working with the different stakeholders, and since February 2020, Airbus also engaged a 5G risk management multifunctional team to ensure the continuous safe operation of the airplanes, with the objective to assess the performance of all radio altimeters installed on Airbus fleets via testing and in collaboration with the suppliers, based on, but not limited to, the hypothesis from RTCA papers. Another objective was to determine the worst-case scenarios at aircraft level to detect 5G interferences and the associated effects, to share the Airbus risk management progress and results with the FAA and the EASA, and last but not least, to co-share the new radio altimeter standards that I've been talking about in the previous slide, the MOPS, to ensure future radio altimeter performances. Among those activities, the previous main milestones have been between April and October of 2020 to capture the radio altimeter suppliers' technical risk evaluation on the possible 5G interferences with reference to the RTCA recommendations. In October 2020, decision to initiate a product safety initiative in order to perform preliminary risk analysis at aircraft level on all Airbus aircraft types. And in December 2020, the development of a risk assessment on all Airbus aircraft types. And from February 2020 up to now, Airbus and EASA are on technical discussions on this topic. Now, a few words about the cockpit effects that may have been observed when in presence of radio frequency interferences. If we consider current 5G antenna emissions, we'd like to confirm that at this stage, no risk of no unsafe risk and no observable effects are expected. If we go beyond the RTCA level, the radio altimeters erroneous can be some of erroneous can be observed and are close to the one we already know in the presence of perturbations by different type of radio frequency interferences. The known radio frequency interference impact on the aircraft systems are erroneous 8 values, usually at lowest altitudes, most likely leading to low erroneous 8. Partial or complete loss of radio altimeters data, leading to red flag on PFDs and ECAM alerts. And impact on other aircraft systems, such as the audio callout, the autoland, the surveillance, etc. This is just to give you an overview of what we already know based on the in-service experience and our knowledge of the RFE impacts on radio altimeters. In conclusion, the investigation performed with the emissions with RTCA limits did not reveal any impact on the safety of the operations. And nevertheless, ongoing discussion between Airbus authorities and telecommunication community on the need to consider situation above the established standards will allow us to define the new levels if needed. Okay, so as you already know, last week the FAA published an AD to inform and mandate the application of NOTAMs on some US airports that prohibits precision approaches requiring radio altimeters data when in the presence of 5G C-band interference. In the airworthiness directives, the consequences on Airbus aircraft operations, is a restriction of instrument landing system instrument approach procedures known as special CAT 1, CAT 2, CAT 2, and CAT 3, required navigation performance procedure with authorization required, ANPRR, and automatic landing operations. For non-US registered aircraft operators, there is actually, from Airbus point of view, no need to include the limitation in the AFM unless it is explicitly required by the national airworthiness authorities. And of course, to follow the NOTAMs. For the US registered aircraft operators, the airlines must introduce the limitations mentioned in the AD in the aircraft flight manual before the 4th of January 2022. And of course, to follow the NOTAM as well. it is under the operator's responsibility to assess the impact of the NOTAMs for the interlane operation. On the bottom right of the slide, you have an overview of the known US airports concerned by the FAAD at this date. Please be aware that this map is just for information and is about to be updated regularly. So it's only valid at this time. Another important information is that in response to the FAA Airworthiness Directive, the ASA published a paper position stating that they actually do not consider eligible for adoption. On this slide, you will find the how-to in order to update your own AFM with a link to the Airbus World Portal that allow you to access to the user manual XML authoring guide. If you have any question on this point, we can rediscuss that here. Okay, I'll leave you the floor, Jan.
Hi, gentlemen. I am Captain Jan Lardet, Chief Technical Pilot for Airbus. I will share with you the operational recommendation that we have in Airbus flight operation support and training standards. First of all, and to reinforce the message, according to the FAA AD 2021-2312, NOTAMs shall be issued to limit the operations of the following procedures. First of all, the Instrument Landing System Instrument Approach Procedures, Special Authorization CAT 1, Special Authorization CAT 2, Regular CAT 2 and CAT 3. The Required Navigation Performance Procedures with authorization required, namely RNPAR approaches and all automatic landing operations. At this stage, while we do not know yet what will be the exact content of the upcoming NOTAMs, it is our understanding that the regular ILS CAT 1 approaches are not impacted, that the regular RNP approaches are not impacted, and basically the conventional non-precision approaches as well, such as VOR approaches. As a consequence, we have some extra recommendation for the ILS CAT 1. So when a 5G related NOTAM will exist at the destination airport, let's use the common sense and get flight crew to be aware that interferences could affect the radio altimeter indication during the approach. And as stated by Thibault, it would generally arrive when the aircraft reaches the low height, and the radio altimeter may be giving low indication or close to zero indication. So we would like to remind you that the ILS CAT 1 approaches can be flown using the normal Airbus SOPs down to the decision heights. The ILS raw data, so basically the lock and the glide signals, are not affected by potential 5G interferences, which means that the pilot will always keep the ability to fly the raw data approach like they are trained in the simulator, like they are checked in the simulators every 6 months, using the diamonds for the localizer and the glide, and this is an operation that's completely safe down to the decision height. However, as per the SOP, in case of an auto-flight misbehavior while flying this ILS CAT 1 approach using autopilot and flight director, the flight crew must be ready to discontinue the approach, so do a go-around, and attempt a second approach without the autopilot and flight director. Or the pilots can disconnect the autopilot and flight director and continue the ILS manually with the raw data, or disconnect the autopilot and flight director and continue the approach using external visual references if those references are available. Usually the interferences are happening very close to the ground, so in most cases the crew should be inside of the runway and could complete the landing safely.
Thank you, Jan. just to give you an overview of the next milestone, we are currently on a discussion for an alternative means of compliance, AMOC, in order to alleviate the operational burden of the AD on Airbus fleets. We are also working on additional research and testing, and it will continue during the next year to 2022. Some skywise monitoring are also under preparation for the next months in order to capture and monitor the radio altimeter's behavior across the fleet. And we are in cooperation with the administrations and agency to secure the safety of flight operations.
So as a conclusion on this presentation and ahead of your questions, Airbus has long been working on the 5G interference topic and pretty intensely in the past 2 years, alongside with radio altimeter manufacturers and with authorities. And as we speak, Airbus is intensely cooperating through various agencies and other manufacturers in order to have a consolidated approach for the aviation industry and make sure that the safety of the operations is not impaired. As of today, we can still anticipate that US operations could be exposed to significant constraints following the AD as of 5th of Jan 2022. We are actively working to have the smoothest situation early January next year, but as we speak, we can't give any guarantee on Airbus side. The AMOC process will aim at alleviating the AD operational burden. So we have intense works ongoing with aviation authorities to determine the most suitable course of action. There are various ways to approach this AMOC with different level of constraints, and we are doing our best to make it the smoothest possible for you in order to have the least work and the easiest continuation of the operation. We are committed to support your operation and to provide up-to-date information. We'll use mostly 2 channels. The first one is a regular publication and update of the FOT that you received on Monday. It will be revised and pushed to you on due time when we have something significantly new to communicate. And we'll also maintain the IZ article 34, 42, 48 to give you the options to go and pull the information for your usual Airbus World Portal. So both Thibault and myself, we thank you very much for attending this webinar. We'll now be ready to take your questions. For this, we'll pause the presentation for roughly 5 minutes, and we will be back at 7:30 Zulu time to give you ample time to ask your question through the Q&A window of your application. Please do not use the chat. The question raised in the chat will be left unanswered. So we will require you to use the Q&A mode of the software in order to ask your question. Thank you very much, and talk to you in 5 minutes with the first questions.
What is the scope of the AMOC, and when will the AMOC be approved by the FAA?
Patricia Sarr, I work in the Certification Department. So the AMOC approval is up to the FAA to answer our proposal. So we cannot state when it will be available. It will be up to the FAA.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question, is it possible for 5G interference to affect the transition of normal low to flare mode?
Okay, so Yann Lardet speaking. So as you are all aware, the normal low embeds a number of modes, and indeed, when approaching the ground, the normal low transition to a flare mode as described in your FCOM. Depending on the type of aircraft we are talking about, this typically occurs around 50 to 100 feet. So we have been simulating extensively the behavior of the normal law under 5G perturbation. And we have assessed with our teams of test pilots and operational pilots what is the effect of this change of the flare mode if it happens at an height that is perturbed by the interferences. And what we have been able to demonstrate is that the effect on the law, and in particular the freeze of the THS, does not have a significant impact on the controllability of the aircraft. So the aircraft remains controllable without restriction. There is a slight behavioral change of the aircraft that has not been perturbating the pilots to complete their landing. So we do not have any big issue with the perturbation of the radio altimeter towards the normal law.
Okay, thank you. Next question is on the based on Airbus and OEM assessment of the current LRRA models and port numbers, which LRRA model and port number are the most or more susceptible to 5G interference?
Okay, so to answer the question, Patrick Hans talking from Design Office. Agreement on the susceptibility versus radio altimeters. Our numbers are completely under discussion now with the two authorities, FAA and EASA, notably to define properly what are the level of tweak to be considered. And then agreement on susceptibility will be depending, of course.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. The next question is about the FAA-AD. The FAA-AD will be applied to operations in the USA airspace. How about other countries where there are 5Gs?
So Patricia Sarr, our CNS and certifications. We know that Australians have recognized the FAA-AD, that EASA didn't, but for the other, we don't know up to now.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, can you please provide more information about the use of the HUD as mentioned in the AD? Is it still possible to use it in case of 5G NOTAM on an airfield?
So the use of the HUD for regular operation is not impacted by the radio altimeter interference. However, in the AD, the special authorization approaches, in particular special authorization CAT 1, special authorization CAT 2, that do require the head-up display is forbidden by the airworthiness directive. So as a consequence, you can still use your head-up display for all operations, but the special authorization CAT 1 and CAT 2 approaches.
Thank you, Jan. Next question is, will Airbus publish the AD in a future AFM revision for affected operators? And if so, when will this be expected?
Thibault speaking, for the moment, the decision is not to include the restriction of the AD in our AFM. What we mentioned in our slide is that we do not recommend the operators to modify their AFM unless this is explicitly requested by your authorities.
So maybe to complement on that one, it's important to observe that the EASA has not been recognizing the airworthiness directive. The EASA is the primary certification authority for all Airbus aircraft, and for this reason, it is the Airbus position that we do not need to update all the AFM of our products. However, we understand that based on the FAA requirements for N-registered aircraft, and also in case of recognition of the AD by other airworthiness authorities or operational authorities, operators may have to embed that in their AFM because of the requirement of these authorities. In this case, we have provided in the slides the guidance how to proceed for you to embed the AD within your AFM because of the requirement of your national authorities. This will not be handled by Airbus, as our position remains that the AD is not applicable to our product as per certification requirements.
Thank you, Jan. So we will make a pause of 2 minutes more here, and then we'll be back to you in 2 minutes.
So yeah, see you in 2 minutes after we have been able to gather other questions. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question, we are back now. And then the next question is about the applicability of the FAAD. So about the applicability, is it applicable to all operators flying to the US? Must the AFM be updated? Because in your presentation, you said that it is only for US registered aircraft. Can you clarify, please?
Okay, so what we can remind as a general rule applicable for all airworthiness directives is that an airworthiness directive is determined by the registration of the aircraft. The applicability of the AD is determined by the registration of the aircraft. It is the authority of certification for the country where the aircraft is registered that decide whether the AD must be applied or not. So the AD can be either adopted, can be modified, or can be not adopted. In the case of the EASA countries, EASA made clear that, at least for the time being, they do not adopt the AD. So, for example, for all operators who are registered within the EASA geographical environment, we do not have to embed the AD in the AFM. However, a NOTAM will be published in the destination airfields. So for these operators flying to the US, where NOTAM will exist, they will have to take into account the NOTAM for their operation. So they will not need to have the AD incorporated in the AFM, but they shall stick to the NOTAM and thus restrict their operation, especially not doing Cat 2, Cat 3 operations or autoland operations.
Thank you, Jan. The next question is, what is the specific RTCL limits mentioned in the presentation for which aircraft array is not affected by 5G transmission?
Patrick Stocking, Design Office. So the level considered in the RTCR report is linked to the operation in US, meaning that the base station developed under FCC regulations are the worst in terms of power level. So today, when we talk about RTCR level, we refer to those stations in a band 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how about the effect on automatic call-out when there is an array interference?
So automatic callouts are triggered as per radio altimeter signals. And we can anticipate that with erroneous radio altimeter messages, because of the perturbation, there could be undue auto callouts being triggered. As a reminder, the likelihood of the interferences is when the aircraft is close to the ground. So these callouts, when approaching the grounds, might be coming in an untimely or undue manner. That's why I would like to remind what are the recommendations, operationally speaking, when doing an approach, is if the flight crew is approaching under IP FDs and is perturbed by the misbehavior of the systems, including the auto callouts, they should consider going around and approaching again without autopilot and flight director. They could also decide to switch off autopilot and flight director to continue the approach using the raw data, or they could continue the landing using the external visual references and disregard any perturbation such as auto callout.
Thank you. we have another question. We do not know the content of the NOTAMs yet, and the only information, if it will be only information about the possibility of interference or limitation of the approaches. As mentioned in the presentation from Captain Jan and Thibault, neither do Airbus. So the question is Airbus working with the FAA to see how the NOTAMs will look like?
Okay, Claude Fischerman speaking. Yeah, of course, we are speaking regularly with FAA in order to try to get as soon as possible this kind of answer, for sure, which will be helpful for our customer and ourselves. But unfortunately, for the time being, we do not have such parameter about the ground station in US. So we are discussing with FAA again. Thank you.
Maybe just to complement what you just said, Claude, when you say we are talking regularly, actually it's several times a day almost. Huh? So it's an extensive amount of communication that has been happening with the authorities, in particular in the past 2 weeks, but I would say for the past 1 year, you have been extensively working with the authorities and with the FAA.
Thank you. So the next question is about timeline. Does Airbus have an estimate of the timeline when the next update will be?
It's a bit early to tell you when we will do an update, because the situation as we speak is very dynamic. There are several initiatives that are ongoing. We have been talking extensively on the technical aspects of our initiatives and discussion with authorities to demonstrate the safety of our operation under certain conditions. But there are also, as you may have noticed in the press yesterday, some other sort of discussion at a more political level. The various aircraft manufacturers or providers of radio altimeters are working together to convince the governments in the US in particular that there is an important topic in this discussion between FAA and FCC, and that the consequences for our industry could be huge. So all these initiatives are happening in parallel, and the outcomes are unclear yet. So we do not want to bother you with minor updates or communication on uncertainties. We would like to come back to you with an update once we have a significant change in the situation, once we are able to communicate something that is practically usable, that will modify your operation. So typically speaking, we consider at this stage, with the information that we have, that the Cat 1 ILS approaches are still available, which means that a vast majority of the operation shall not be disrupted. And it's only when very poor weather conditions will exist that the operation will be disrupted. When we will be in position to come back to you with good news on the future of Autoland in particular and Cat 2, Cat 3 operations, we will update you with our latest information. As long as we don't have any tangible news on those Cat 2, Cat 3 operations and Autoland operations, we believe it's better to continue to consolidate the information, to work with agencies, to work with governments, and continue to push the best interest of Airbus operators.
Thank you, Jan. So we'll pause here 2 minutes to take a new batch of questions.
Thank you.
So the first one is, can Airbus provide a full list of systems which could be affected by erroneous radio altimeter?
Oh, yes, I guess we have some information to share on that topic.
Fabien Cad speaking from the customer support engineering. So indeed, the several systems are connected to the radio altimeter system, such as the display, so the PFD, the HUD. You have also some autopilot flight command system, surveillance system for the TCAS, the terrain, the radar systems. So actually, we already have some documentation about the effect of erroneous radio altimeter data provided to these systems. We have 2 TFUs articles to describe this effect. So I propose to write down the reference of this TFU in the chat panel, and you will find further information regarding the effect of these erroneous data. These TFUs were written in the frame of general radio altimeter interference, not specifically for the 5G. We reinforce the message that we are not expecting effect on currently with the given figures on the radio altimeter systems.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so the TFU reference will be posted in a few seconds in the chat. So please refer to the chat to be able to connect to the right documents.
Thank you. So the next question is about Skywise. How does Skywise monitoring work and what data is used?
Okay, it's an excellent question. So for those who are not aware, Skywise is a big data system that is powered by Airbus, where operators willing to contribute can share their information with the required level of confidentiality for Airbus to be able to conduct a number of analyses, but also for the customer to be able to use the big data capabilities that the platform offers. So using the 100 plus operators data that have been shared within Skywise, we will be able to proceed for big data analysis and seek for events that would be consequences of the 5G interferences. So for us, what has been started already is the monitoring of what's happening on the fleet with regards to radio altimeter data being presented under Skywise.
Thank you, Jan. Another question concerning the NOTAMs. In case of limitations, the limitations are directly included in the NOTAMs. The AMOC would not help because in all cases, operators would need to monitor the NOTAMs and include these limitations.
So I understand that the concern of the person asking the question is to know whether the AMOC will have an impact on the applicability of the NOTAM. As we speak, we have no certitude on the content of the NOTAM, but in our discussion with the authorities, it's very clear that the AMOC aims at alleviating the operational burden that is created by the AD. So there will be a continuity in the FAA between, on one side, the AMOC requirements, and on the other side, the way NOTAMs are being coordinated with airports. So without knowing exactly what will be the precise wording, we anticipate that once the AMOC will be approved, the NOTAM effect will not apply with wording that will be adapted in the NOTAM to reflect that consequence of the AMOC.
Thank you. When the FAA talks about auto-land operation, is autothrust also included, and does this also apply to manual landing with autothrust engaged?
Yeah, so indeed, one of the reasons why the autoland is banned by the airworthiness directive is because of the various interdependencies between the radio altimeter and the auto-flight system, including obviously the autothrust. That is the reason why we reminded during the presentation that operation with AP and FDs off is not impacted by the perturbation because there is no guidance, and in this case the autothrust is operated in PID mode. So there is no undue thrust idle engagement in that context. So we consider that the safety of the operation is not impacted when operated with AP off and FDs off. We are still working on the robustness on the system and testing the consequences of the emission at various level of emissions to see how far we can go with our auto-flight system. When operated within the RTCA limits, we have no constraints as we speak.
Okay, so we are coming to the end of the session now, and we have still a lot of questions. What we will do is we will give all the questions and of course all the answers in a document that we will put on Airbus One, and you have information about that later. We take a last question, and then Captain Leon will give a conclusion to the session. So the last question is about, I would like to know if this 5G interference can affect our NP approach, combining with GPS or using GBAS and SBAS system.
So today we do not have interference of the 5G emission on the SBAS signals. So the stack of approach is not impacted by the airworthiness directive. So thank you very much for the almost 200 attendees that were there today from many places around the world. We do acknowledge the burden that this might create on your operation. We hope we've been able to provide you with a number of answers and guidances, especially with regards to the updates of the AFM and some operational recommendations to secure the continuity of your operations. We will publish this presentation on Airbus World once we will have completed the second session that will happen later today. And we will also put the most frequently asked question in the IZ article for your reference. In the meantime, stay tuned to your FOT transmission channel. We will be updating the community as soon as we are able to come with some significant updates and positive news, hopefully. We would like to take the opportunity of this conclusion to wish you and your loved ones Merry Christmas and best wishes for 2022. Hopefully a fast recovery from the COVID situation and from this 5G burden that we are all been facing. Thank you very much and have a nice end of day.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody.